Tuesday morning aftermath. Between yesterday and tomorrow, a collection of short stories from Val's Sanctuary of Creativity. Yes, that fateful Tuesday morning event rattled me to the core. I woke up the next day with one goal in mind: to get ready and make my way into Manhattan to offer my help in some way. Armed with some certificates and my Bach flower remedies, I found myself sitting in my white Ford Taurus city-bound. Leaving the Five Towns behind me, I cruised past the Sherwood Diner down Rockaway Boulevard, finding myself driving behind a car with the license plate, My Peace. Just before JFK Airport, the My Peace car prepared to turn right. There it was, a pivotal moment of choice. Would my life have taken a different turn if I had continued to follow that car? A question I have asked myself more than a few times. The ride was pleasant with very little traffic. I saw billboard signs advertising movies that insinuated something big is coming. The one I still remember warned, "Prepare to cross the line." It felt like yesterday's news. I took the 59th Street Bridge, also known as the Queensboro Bridge, straight for Central Park. I thought I'll ground myself there before heading south to the Armory, where the Red Cross had set up field. Parking near the park was no issue back then. I took my camera, which was always my companion on every excursion. Upon entering the park, I laid myself down on the first patch of green grass. The ground felt dry. There were trees on both sides of me, and above a double rainbow against a faint blue September sky. Of course I took a picture. Feeling at peace, I remained there for a while. Then it was back to my mission. I took Fifth Avenue heading downtown, and by the time I arrived in Midtown, there were barricades and police officers blocking the streets. Undeterred, I approached the police officer through the window of my car. I stated that the Armory was my destination. I handed him my master's in religious science and my interfaith minister certificate, and then he waved me on my way. I drove to the front of the Tribeca Armory. There was nothing much happening. I left the car and crossed the street. At the entrance there was a table with a woman sitting behind it. We spoke and she consulted with someone over the phone. It looked as if I was going to be sent back to Queens to help a fireman in emotional distress. Just as she handed me the address, a young man approached. Noticing my accent, he stopped me and asked if I had any language skills. I affirmed that I spoke Italian and German and understand some Spanish. He then informed me that there was a need for translators. They had set up command center at the Jacob Javits Center. Back in the car, it felt surreal as I made my way up the West Side Highway with an armored military vehicle in front of me. The entrance to the Javits Center was lined with makeshift bulletin boards representing relatives searching for their loved ones. Inside, hundreds, maybe thousands of teddy bears were stacked high on both sides. The receptionist asked me to fill out a form, thanked me and told me that they would call me should a need arise. She mentioned that a lot of people had offered to help. That concluded my mission for the day, and I drove back home. On the way, I stopped at CVS to have my film developed. That night, the native spirit awoke in me. It's a state of being where you are one with your surroundings. I had visited the Shinnecock Indian powwow on Labor Day weekend just a short time prior. The powwow is one of the largest Native American gatherings on the East Coast. It was past midnight when I gathered up all my collected candles, remnants from parties at the country club. I made my way down to my spot on the beach. I placed the candles in the circle and lit them. There I was, alone with the moon and the stars, on the shore of the Atlantic Ocean, barefoot in the sand. In a rhythmic circling dance, I connected with the universal spirit, and I danced, and I danced. Dawn broke, and I packed up my candles and sat on the rocks awaiting the new sunrise. But the sun did not rise yet. Instead, a large family walked onto the beach. A black-clothed man, thin boys with long curls, women and girls walking behind them in long skirts and holding books in their hands. Soon more families of the same kind joined them. I was invisible to them, or they must have simply not cared. They had gathered there at the edge of the water with their open books, throwing pieces of bread into the shallow waters. The swans were grateful in those wee hours of the morning. I was told later that they had gathered for Tashlik prayer, seeking forgiveness in preparation for the approaching high holy days as the days of awe approached. This time around, Lel Selikot was no longer a time of words. Now it was the time to translate words into deeds. I lived in the midst of a predominant Jewish community at the time. In the afternoon, I met with my friend from the Miracle Group for a ritual that would support and guide the souls of the victims back home. We had gathered our power tools and burned sage. An Indian chief and healer invoked the wind as we sat there, cleansing a feather collection from Montana. We were not alone, and the wind answered. Later, I went back to CVS to pick up my pictures, feeling disappointment at how faint the rainbows appeared. A woman next to me consoled me after I told her the story, saying that this is a very good and heavenly sign for these times. She saw the rainbows clearly. Finally, I went back home to sleep. I entered the kitchen of the country club through the back door that Sunday morning when I returned to work. The chef and I locked eyes. I told him that our world and our lives would never be the same. He just said, "I know." On any other Sunday, the club room would have been empty at that time, and I would prepare the dining room and set up for the brunch rush. The men would have their focus on the 18th hole, while the women would be upstairs playing bridge or doing whatever they do there. Not on this Sunday. The room felt of testosterone, as all the men gathered around the bar, standing with their eyes on the TV above. Their president was about to address the nation. He spoke of the axis of evil, and that you are either for or against us. The enemy had been declared, and the men in the room had heard the drums of war and cheered. I sought out allegiance of peace, and I found it in a random woman. We recognized each other, and we stood there in a silent hug for what seemed like a very long time. Then the brunch rush began as everybody was hungry.